Hello everyone, this is Isador, and in this video I'll explain how the lore of the Big Waaagh works. I'll talk about each spell individually, what their effects are, and how to apply them most effectively in battle. The lore of the Big Waaagh is the aggressive counterpart to the more defensively orientated Little Waaagh. While the Little Waaagh is all about debuffing the enemy to reduce your own casualties, the Big Waaagh is a combination of powerful offensive buffs and destructive spells. As such, practitioners of the Big Waaagh, which include Wurrzak and the Orc Shaman, function as a mixture of support units by buffing your own and living artillery. Each wizard of the Big Waaagh has access to a special passive called Power of the Big Waaagh. This is a simple passive that increases the power recharge rate of the owner of the unit with this ability, allowing them to cast more spells than the average wizard as long as the unit with the ability is alive. The main advantage of the passive of this lore is that it's effective under all circumstances. Whereas some lores have passives that are only effective when facing specific enemies, such as the passive of the lore of the Little Waaagh, which is only effective against enemy spellcasters, the passive of the lore of the Big Waaagh is helpful no matter what kind of enemy you face. Gaze of Mork is a magic missiles projectile spell. You fire a bundle of magical projectiles at a target, which fly in a more or less straight line from the caster to the target, and deal high damage on impact. It's mainly a way for you to deal a bunch of damage to large monsters, or war machines, like giants, steam tanks, or griffins. You can also use it against infantry, but because the spell doesn't explode in a wide area of effect, it doesn't usually kill a lot of soldiers. Plus, this lore is full of other spells that are much better suited for that than the Gaze of Mork. The Gaze of Mork also has an added advantage of being very cheap for a spell of its kind, at only 7 power points. You can also overcast this spell for a bunch of added range, allowing it to function as true magical artillery, albeit for a greater cost in power points and with a miscast chance. However, I personally don't recommend overcasting it, mostly because the spell doesn't fly that fast, and at such long ranges it becomes a lot easier to dodge or miss. And remember, the spell will travel in a straight line. Do not cast this spell if the caster is right behind your own units, otherwise you'll hit your own soldiers. As such, it's best cast from a hilltop where the caster has direct line of sight of an enemy, without any friendly units in the way. Brain Bursta has a bit of a deceptive description. It doesn't actually fire a bolt, rather, it creates an explosion at the target location, dealing magic damage to all enemies caught in the blast radius and scattering the survivors. It's a powerful, cheap way to damage enemy units or punch holes in enemy formations for your infantry to exploit. You can also overcast the ability for added armor piercing damage and longer casting range. Fists of Gork is a powerful single target buff that increases melee defense, melee attack, and weapon damage for a single squad. It's a really powerful spell that can turn even a basic Orc Boy squad into a serious threat, but it's best used on your strongest units, like Black Orcs or Savage Orc Biguns, who benefit most from the added stats. Since the spell is pretty cheap, it's a great way to help one of your units break through enemy lines. But of course, the big drawback of this spell is that it only affects one of your units, meaning that its impact on big battles involving 20 squads on both sides can be limited. Eadbutt is your biggest area of effect spell in this lore. It hits all units in a teardrop-shaped area for decent damage, though in terms of raw damage it's not the strongest spell in this lore. Its main advantage is that it hits everything in a really big area, allowing you to potentially ruin tightly packed unit formations. Of course, the main drawback of the spell is its odd shape. Because of this, it can be hard to hit all the units you want. And if your own units are fighting the ones you want to target, it can be difficult to make full use of the large area of effect without hitting your own troops. You can also overcast this spell for even more damage. Doing that makes the spell cause some really impressive damage across its large area, but it does dramatically increase the cost of the spell from 11 points to 21 points. So be careful, overcasting it carelessly can drain you of your power points really easily. Ere We Go is a big area of effect buff that gives a huge melee attack buff to multiple friendly units. While not exactly cheap at 10 power points, it can turn your orc horde into a wrecking ball, as it pushes their melee attack through the roof for a respectable 36 seconds. The only real drawback of this spell is that it's not very cost effective if you cast it on a single squad, or on a bunch of very damaged squads. For that, you're better off using the Fists of Gork or going for pure damage spells instead. The Foot of Gork is a very powerful area of effect damage spell. It hits all enemies in a wide area for very high magic damage and scatters them, and then deals lesser damage to enemies just outside of the area of effect. It's very hard hitting and can decimate squads of enemies, but of course, the price of this spell reflects that power at 18 power points. If the enemy blobs a lot of his units together in a tightly packed brawl, the Foot of Gork can cause incredible damage. If you want to go even further, you can also overcast the spell, raising its cost to an incredible 28 power points to further increase the damage it deals and add extra armor piercing damage. Be careful about overcasting it, and only do so if you've got a densely packed enemy unit formation to throw it at. You can't afford anything less with how costly this spell is when overcasting it. That's it for the Big Waaagh. If you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you'd like to support me in making more content, please visit my Patreon. You can find a link in the description below. Thank you for watching and see you in my next video.